Hello and Assalamu alaikum. In this video, we're solving the Cambridge O-Levels Biology Paper 2 theory paper for the May June 2022 session code 5090 and the variant 1. So before we begin with the paper, you should know the changes in the paper pattern. So from 2023 onwards, there were no more sections that you had to attempt. Only 6 to 7 questions are appearing in your paper and you have to attempt them. So previously you had section A, B and C, but it is no more and you only have to attempt 6 to 7 questions that you've been given in the whole paper. The total time limit is same as before, which is 1 hour and 45 minutes, and you should be spending 80 minutes roughly in solving your paper, and the rest 20 to 25 minutes should be there for you to recheck your paper. Total marks are also same as before, which is 80, and by this you should know that the weightage of P2 is also higher. But before we begin with the paper, I would like to tell you about our topical past papers, which is a very convenient way for you to study. So let's say you've finished the topic cell structure and you have revised with the notes, you've made the notes, you've done everything. So now you're on the topical questions. So ideally आप पहले topical past papers को solve करेंगे without looking at the mark scheme, and once you're done solving 10 to 15 questions, you will check with the mark scheme. But here's a little twist. In our past papers, आपको एक QR code मिलेगा just beneath the topic. And when you scan that, you will be headed to a playlist on YouTube that solves and explains you all the concepts and all the topical questions that were in that specific chapter. तो आपने देखा होगा कि अगर आपका हर क्वेश्चन भी ठीक हुआ है and you've checked it simultaneously with the mark scheme and your all questions are right, but even the advantage you would have with our topical past papers is कि आप फिर भी अपनी mistakes और आप अपनी explanations को बेहतर कर सकते हैं, and you can learn in a more enhanced way with our topical past papers. So having said this all, let's begin with the paper. Question number 1. The diagram shows human skin. Part A, identify the parts labeled B and C. Now, whether you can look at this diagram or this one, but since this came up in your exam, let's have a look at this one for the time being. But for comparison, हम यहाँ पे भी देखेंगे the structures. So part B, it is surrounding almost every structure आप देख सकते हैं, चाहे वो आपका hair follicle हो, which is this one, या चाहे वो आपका sweat gland हो, which is this one. It is surrounding almost every structure. तो आपको idea तो हो गया होगा that it is the arteries or blood vessel. Now, they said to identify part C as well. So part C is the sweat gland. This is very easy to identify and it is the sweat gland. Now, if you look at this diagram, आप देख रहे होंगे यहाँ पे capillaries भी हैं and they are also surrounding the structures. But the main difference is that capillaries are quite thin than arterioles because capillaries सबसे small होती हैं between arteries and veins. So in this structure, अगर आप capillaries लिख देंगे instead of blood vessels, तो capillaries तो ये हैं सारी, and they're not even marked or labeled by any initial. So that cannot be the answer, and the best option had to be blood vessels. Now part 2, describe how part B is involved in maintaining a constant body temperature when the external temperature drops. So part B was the blood vessels, and maintaining a constant body temperature means your internal body temperature remains the same regardless of what the external conditions are. So right now they said the external temperature drops, which means it is cold weather outside. So there is going to be vasoconstriction. What is that? सो बिफोर आई स्टार्ट मैं आपको बता दूं कि मेरे हर क्वेश्चन के साथ आपको की पॉइंट्स मिलेंगे विच इज़ नॉट द आंसर, इट इज़ अ मोर गुड एक्सप्लेनेशन ऑफ द आंसर एक्चुअली, बिकॉज आंसर तो आपको इस तरह मार्क्स की में नज़र आ रहा होगा, बट आई हैव एक्सप्लेन्ड इट इन sentences or in points to help you understand better what the question is asking you. So we were talking about vasoconstriction. That means the diameter of the blood vessels shrinks or decreases and it reduces the blood flow near the skin surface. So for example, this is how normally your blood vessel looks like, but if there is cold conditions outside, आपको ये मिलेगा. And what's the difference? There is difference inside the lumen. आप देख सकते हैं कि इसका lumen ज़्यादा wider है, and in vasoconstriction the lumen is constricted or shrink. That is because there should be minimal heat escaping from the body to the external environment. And by constricting the blood vessels, the body limits blood flow to areas where heat loss would be most significant, conserving heat for vital organs that are located deeper within the body. So if you look at the Marxian point, it says the same. that there is less blood flow in the blood vessels which are close to the skin surface, there is decrease in radiation or heat loss, vasoconstriction, and that the blood vessels constrict. Part B. Part A is unevenly distributed in human skin. Name Part A and suggest reasons for this uneven distribution. So if we go back to the diagram to identify what was Part A, we can see it was the thermoreceptors. This is Part A and these are the thermoreceptors that are present in your skin. So they've asked you that why is there uneven distribution of thermoreceptors in the skin? So, the most important explanation for that is that the thermoreceptors are more in number or more concentrated in certain areas of the body, and particularly in those regions जहाँ पे temperature changes या temperature regulation जो है वो बहुत important है. So, for example, आप एक गर्म मग से चाय पी रहे हैं, that is really hot. तो जो आपके lips हैं आपको पता होना चाहिए कि वो ज़्यादा sensitive हैं and they would have more number of thermoreceptors. There would be a high density of thermoreceptors in your lips as compared to other areas. तो जब आप जैसे ही आप गर्म चीज़ पीते हैं आपने देखा होगा ठंडी चीज़ आप फ़ौरन उसको हटा लेते हैं. That's because फ़ौरन एक response generate होता है through the receptors, an impulse gets generated और फ़ौरन वो आप response के तौर पे उसको हटा लेते हैं. That means the temperature is detected very quickly at those areas. And they are mostly present on the face, hands or feet. वहाँ पे आपको ज़्यादा density मिलेगी. Part C, the thickness of layer D can change over several months. So just to explain one reason for a decrease in the thickness. Now we have to go back to the diagram to identify layer D, which is this. And that is the fat layer or the adipose tissue or cell. ये आप देख सकते हैं fat layer है. So they're asking you to explain one reason why there might be a decrease in the thickness over several months. So it is very obvious that if you eat food that is less rich in fat and you consume less fat in your diet and you exercise regularly, your fat will be consumed. That's what we say to burn calories. या अगर आप exercise करते हैं तो आपने सुना होगा उसके साथ burning calories is a term that is used most commonly. So that means कि वो fat आपकी body utilize कर लेती है for respiration to release energy. आप याद रख सकते हैं respiration का RE and release का RE. So respiration means to release energy. And the body will be using more energy than it is taking in. So this is a very important statement and you have to write 2 points out of it. आपकी fat की thickness जो है वो change हो सकती है due to your dietary habits as well, because if you start consuming less fat जो आपका पहले से fat होगा वो burn होना शुरू हो जाएगा. So that's it for question 1. Let's move on to question 2. Question number 2. A man decides to do some fitness training to improve his ability to provide oxygen to his muscles. Part A. Describe the route an oxygen molecule takes from the atmosphere to reach the muscles. Now, basically, you can divide this route into two parts. First can be the lungs route, and the second can be the circulation route. So, in the lungs route, आपने lungs तक की journey describe करनी है. So, firstly, आप बताएंगे that by inhaling oxygen, it enters through our nose and travels down the windpipe, which is also known as the trachea. Then it will move through the air tubes called bronchi and smaller tubes called bronchioles. And eventually, it will reach the air sacs or the alveoli in the lungs. Now, the journey after the lungs begin in the circulation route. अब हमारे ब्लड में भी तो जाना है ऑक्सीजन ने. So oxygen goes from the alveoli by diffusion from the capillaries that surround them into the blood. There it gets attached to the red blood cells or the hemoglobin inside them, and then it is transported by veins. The oxygen rich blood is carried by the pulmonary vein to the heart from lungs. So whenever there is the word pulmonary, always remember it means something is linked with the lungs. And the last part would be that oxygenated blood would be pumped by the heart through arteries to different body parts और वहीं से आपके muscles को भी blood चला जाएगा. So that's what you had to describe in this 4 marks question. Part 2. The fitness training is designed to result in changes to the man's body. Suggest 2 body changes that will improve his ability to provide oxygen to his muscles. So if he has done fitness training and that was proved to be efficient, it would bring changes to the man's body. So what changes? For example, there can be a larger lung capacity. So what happens when there is larger lung capacity? There are higher chances of oxygen being binded to the hemoglobin in red blood cells with more oxygen available. That means a greater quantity of oxygenated blood would be transported throughout the body, including the muscles. Then there would be stronger or thicker cardiac muscle, and they would be able to pump more blood in each cardiac cycle, and that would help improve the blood supply overall, even to the heart muscle, and more hemoglobin and more red blood cells would be generated. So you had to write for 2 marks any 2 points out of them. Part B, the man measures how much oxygen his body uses. That means his oxygen consumption at different intensities of exercise from rest to high intensity. So, rest is like if you and me are sitting normally, and then high intensity exercises, if you're doing some vigorous exercises, for example, you're running, you're jogging, or you're jumping. So, his results are shown in the graph. So on the y-axis, you have the oxygen consumption in dm per cube per minute. This is the unit of volume. And on the x-axis, you have the exercise intensity. So part 1, state the name of the chemical process that uses oxygen to release energy in the muscle. So that is aerobic respiration. Because firstly हमें पता चल गया that it uses oxygen, and the respiration that uses oxygen is the aerobic one. And release energy is also what respiration does. So simply आपने respiration नहीं लिखना था, you have to write aerobic respiration in order to get these 2 marks. Part 2, use the graph to determine the maximum volume of oxygen the man consumes in 1 minute. So per minute means 1 minute, and the maximum amount he has reached, we can see where the graph levels off, and that is 3.4 exactly. अगर आप यहाँ से count करें, it is 3.4. Part 3. The graph shows that it is possible for the man to increase the intensity of his exercise beyond the point at which he has reached his maximum oxygen consumption. He can only do this for a short period of time. Explain why. Now they're saying that the man has the possibility to increase the intensity of his exercise beyond the point he has reached his maximum oxygen consumption. That means he has used the maximum amount of oxygen. After that, when the exercise intensity is beyond the maximum oxygen consumption, the body will automatically switch to anaerobic metabolism, which means to produce energy in the lack of oxygen. Aerobic respiration में हम क्या करते हैं, हम ऑक्सीजन को यूज करते हैं, but anaerobic respiration में we do it in the lack of oxygen. This would rapidly build up the lactic acid, and it would cause discomfort and fatigue in your muscles, or you can even say cramps. So it's not sustainable for a long period of time because of the discomfort caused by it. So muscles get affected, and they likely the person has to lower the intensity to recover from the accumulated fatigue and lactic acid. So in 3 points, आपने in 5 points में से कोई भी 3 लिखने थे, and you could have gotten the marks. Last part, part 4. After 4 weeks of training, the man measures his oxygen consumption again. On the graph, sketch a line to show the expected results of successful fitness training. So, after successful fitness training, it is evident the hearts become more efficient in pumping the blood with each beat. And this allows more oxygenated blood to be delivered to the muscles during exercise, and that enhances the overall oxygen supply. So I've attached the picture of the mark scheme जहाँ पे उन्होंने आपको ये ग्राफ एक्सप्लेन किया हुआ है. Because if I draw it with my own hands here, there are chances that it would appear a bit wrong. So that's why I wanted it to be perfect, and that you can see from the mark scheme graph, and I'll explain it verbally. So as we have seen that on y-axis we have the oxygen consumption, on x-axis हमारे पास exercise intensity. So, if we read the statement again, it said that after 4 weeks of fitness training, Dobara he measured his oxygen consumption again. That means we have to sketch a graph again after 4 weeks. So, after 4 weeks, it is evident that his heart or his cardiac muscle has become more efficient in pumping the blood. That means more oxygen supply, and the graph would not end here. It would not level off here. It would be slightly higher because the oxygen consumption would increase. So this graph shows that, and even this graph shows that. So these two are correct graphs. You could have drawn either of them to score the marks. Question number 3. A gardener grows a species of dahlia, a flowering plant. Each year, the gardener chooses his best plants and takes cuttings to make new plants. So, if this is a single dahlia plant, the shoots are being cut out and their lower leaves are removed and they are placed into a well watered soil. That means you provide good environmental conditions and it is covered by a transparent plastic bag. Then the cuttings would grow into new plants. So part A says removing the lower leaves and placing the cuttings in a transparent bag helps preventing them wilt until the roots develop. Suggest and explain how these two steps help to prevent wilting. So if we remove lower leaves, it is understood that they are the site of transpiration. And if we remove the lower leaves, transpiration का जो total surface area हो जाएगा that would be reduced. And that would help minimize water loss from the cuttings and preserve moisture and also reduce the risk of wilting. Now if we talk about covering it with a transparent bag, तो क्या होगा कि humidity maintain रहेगी inside the transparent bag. So that means if this is a leaf and I have covered it with a transparent bag and there is already humid environment, that means there are already water vapors outside. So there would be no transpiration occurring क्योंकि अगर बाहर already water vapor ज़्यादा है तो leaf से क्यों water vapors escape होंगे through transpiration. So again, it's going to help prevent excessive water loss from the leaves and that would help reducing wilting. Part 2. Taking cuttings is a commercial application of asexual reproduction. Define asexual reproduction. So asexual reproduction occurs only from one parent. There is no genetic variation, there is no fertilization. That means male gamete and female gamete do not fuse together. It is just from one parent. And they are genetically identical offspring. कोई भी genetic variation नहीं होती क्योंकि एक ही genes use हो रही होती है. So they're exact copy or clones of each other and this happens from mitosis. Part B. The stems of the dahlia cuttings contain xylem vessels. Describe two functions of xylem vessels in young stems of dahlias. For each function, explain one way in which xylem structure is adapted for this function. सो पहला फंक्शन आप लिख सकते हैं कि xylem vessels जो है वो ट्रांसपोर्ट करते हैं वाटर एंड मिनरल्स which is essential for the growth of young stems of dahlias. So adaptation with a function one can be long, thin, no end cell walls, hollow tubes, and there is no cytoplasm. So there is maximum space for their transpirational pull and the water being moved up. Function 2 is the stem being upright or giving it the mechanical support. So without xylem there the plant would be just wilting. It wouldn't be straight. So the adaptation for this is lignified or woody strengthened hard walls that xylem has and they provide the mechanical support to the plant. Part C. The gardener's dahlia cuttings grow into full-sized plants with flowers. The gardener decides that he would like to produce a plant that combines the disease-resistant characteristics of one of these plants with the red petal color of another. With reference to name parts of the flower, describe how he could achieve this. Now you also have to mention the name parts of the flowers that would be involved. तो यहाँ पे जो मैंने ये की पॉइंट्स लिखे हुए हैं दिस इज़ एक्चुअली लाइक अ शॉर्ट स्टोरी but if you take out 5 to 6 points and you write for this answer you will get all those marks because this is the maximum and the most correct answer जो आपको in sort of questions के लिए use करना है. So first step is the gardener can do pollination by transferring pollen from the stamen which is the male part of the disease resistant plant of the and it should go to the stigma of the female which is the red petal plant. So this process can be done manually using a small brush or by gently transferring pollen from one flower to the stigma of another. And once the pollen reaches the stigma, it forms a pollen tube that grows down the style and into the ovary where fertilization will occur. So this is the place where fertilization will occur. And you have to write down all these names of the plant. So you have to write about stigma, you have to write about anther, and you also have to write about ovary. So the male gametes, which are the sperm, will fertilize the female gametes, which are the ovules inside the ovary. And after it being a successful fertilization, the seeds will start to develop within the ovary. And these seeds will contain the genetic material which is going to be of the both parents combined. So there will be the trait of being disease resistant and also of having a red petal. Now, the seeds are collected and planted to grow new dahlia plants that would have the combination of these both traits inherited from both the parents. So, this is not asexual reproduction because there are two genes that are being combined. So, after he does this multiple times through successive generations, the gardener can further refine these traits into the new plants and he can also achieve the best version of these plants. Question number 4. The human liver contains a high concentration of enzymes called transaminases. These enzymes are important in the metabolism of amino acids. Amino acids are absorbed from the alimentary canal and carried to the liver by a blood vessel. Part A. Name the part of the alimentary canal where absorption occurs and the blood vessel that carries the amino acids to the liver. तो हमेशा एक बात याद रख लें कि जब भी लिवर का जिक्र आएगा इन द क्वेश्चन एंड also about the blood vessel, you have to remember there are two blood vessels that are related to the liver, hepatic portal vein and hepatic artery. So the main function of hepatic portal vein here is to transport nutrients including amino acids from the small intestine. यहाँ पे मैंने small intestine mention किया हुआ है लेकिन याद रखें कि हर organ for example stomach or pancreas all the digestive organs से भी blood जो है वो transport होता है to the liver so it can be further processed and stored and further distribution throughout the body because liver acts as a filter here. It processes the blood and removes all the digestive byproducts and then you have the clean blood which has nutrients in it. So that is the blood vessel that will be used here, not the hepatic artery because hepatic artery जो होती है वो oxygenated blood liver के पास ले जाती है. And the part of the alimentary canal means the digestive tract. It is the long tube that runs from the mouth to the anus and it is responsible for digestion and absorption of nutrients. So what part of the alimentary canal this said is where the absorption occurs. So it occurs mainly in the small intestine or you could have written ileum. But I would prefer to write small intestine so there is less confusion. Ileum is also the part of small intestine. एक्चुअली स्मॉल इंटेस्टाइन जो होती है तीन हिस्सों में डिवाइडेड होती है duodenum, ileum and jejunum. So you have these three parts but if you have written small intestine collectively that's also fine. So small intestine जो होती है वो main site होती है absorption की because it has villi and microvilli which are finger like projections and they increase the surface area for the absorption of nutrients. Part B. There are different types of transaminase. Each type has a specific active site. Explain why this means that each type catalyzes a specific reaction. Now, you've probably read in the question earlier that transaminase is the enzyme, and you should know that each enzyme has a specific active site. And to that specific active site, only a specific substrate can attach and form enzyme substrate complex. This is known as the lock and key hypothesis. So what happens is that they have given the name key to the substrate and the lock is the enzyme. तो जैसे हर ताले के लिए एक स्पेसिफिक चाबी होती है उसी तरह हर एंजाइम को एक स्पेसिफिक सबस्ट्रेट ही लॉक एंड की कॉम्प्लेक्स बना सकता है एंड देन यू विल गेट द प्रोडक्ट. Remember that if the substrate is not of the correct shape and of the complementary shape and it cannot fit inside the active site, there will be no product formed and no enzyme substrate complex will be formed. So you can see in this picture कि ये enzyme है और यहाँ पे उसकी active site है. So you can see the complementary shape of substrate can only fit inside this. And then you have the enzyme substrate complex. So इसको हम बोलते हैं lock and key hypothesis and you have to explain that because this was of 3 points. So you have to write the main 3 points which would mention it is a lock and key hypothesis and how the active site is complementary to the substrate and how enzyme substrate complex will form and how that a wrongly shaped substrate cannot fit into the active site. So any 3 points out of this would have scored you 3 marks. But I always suggest you to write one extra point if for example 3 marks ka to aap 4 points likh दें so that even if one point is not valid you can still score a mark. Question number 5. A plant species lives in ponds. The diagram shows the whole plant and is sectioned through one of its leaves. Part A. The leaves are adapted to float on the surface of the water. Suggest one advantage to the plant of the leaves floating on the surface of water. So this is a very obvious advantage and this should click in your mind कि अगर plant surface of water पे होगा, it is going to be more exposed to the sunlight and more exposed to the air for carbon dioxide, so photosynthesis can take place. Part 2. Name the parts of the leaf labeled A and B. अब जब आपने ये part solve किया, you should definitely know that if they are talking about light and air, then there should be stoma and air or intercellular spaces. And they have also mentioned that this is a section through leaf. So these are the stoma and these are the air spaces, which can easily be identified from this structure. Part 3. With reference to parts A and B, describe and explain how the structure of the leaf is adapted to a pond environment. So, by referring to stoma and air spaces, we have to describe and explain how the structure of the leaf is adapted to a pond environment. So, the large air spaces, also known as the parenchyma, are present in the aquatic plants to make them less dense than water. And you should know that जो भी चीजें less dense होती हैं water से, they start to float, and this property of air spaces will make them easy to float on the surface of water, and they will be more exposed to sunlight and air for efficient gas exchange and photosynthesis. So these adaptation helps the plant stay afloat on the water surface. Now what does stoma do? Stoma is also going to be present on the surface of water. So that means that there will be more photosynthesis again because it will be more exposed to air. Air can enter, air can leave. यानी कि CO2 अंदर आ गया, पर oxygen बाहर जाएगी. That's how these structures enable the leaf to be adapted to a pond environment. Last part, part B, the plant is a part of a food web in a pond state, its trophic level. So trophic level is the position that an organism occupies in a food web or in a food chain. तो प्लांट हमेशा प्राइमरी प्रोड्यूसर ही क्यों होता है या फर्स्ट ट्रॉफिक लेवल पे क्यों होता है? That's because plant has the ability to produce its own food. It does not rely on other organisms. It does rely on sunlight, water, carbon dioxide, but it does not rely on other organisms. It can produce its own food by photosynthesis. That's why it's on first trophic level. So that brings us to the end of the video. Hope you liked it. Make sure to share this with your friends ताकि उनकी भी हेल्प हो सके, और अगर आपको कोई भी क्वेरी या कोई भी मसला हो रहा है किसी भी पार्ट में, you can leave your comments below. We will make sure to reach out to you. Thank you and Allah Hafiz.